Okay, good. So I propose that today, well, today we're looking at Wittgenstein, okay, but put some context on this. Um, uh, one of the themes for the seminar is to let's move from representation to, well, just looking at the limits of representation, what we can or cannot do easily using words, using diagrams, using um, mathematical notation, equations, and then also, of course, more in more complex ways, thinking about how can we represent actions. Okay, that's what software gives us the power to do, like code, right? Certain kinds of actions, certain kinds of sequences of operations. Okay, um, so I wanted to do a deeper dive today into thinking really closely about what words can do, and we say we use language meaning something, right? We talk about things like I give you some, I say something, you know what I mean, or I write something down and you can read it and sort of know what the author meant, stuff like that, you know, or it can be practical, you know, uh, say something and somebody else does something, or you make some sort of coordinated effort to do something. So Wittgenstein, okay, so for about, oh, I don't know, 2,200 years, 2,000 years or so, at least in the Western philosophical project, this is a question about, well, is there a way to say things, in a way that's really precise and make words mean what they mean? And Humpty Dumpty, right? And Lewis Carroll, that famous scene where he was talking to Alice, or was it Humpty Dumpty? No, maybe it was the caterpillar too. Well, anyway, Humpty Dumpty said this, I think, where he was making up some definitions and Alice is getting really annoyed, and then she was challenging him, and he said, "Wow, I I I I I decide what the words mean, basically, you know." Um, so we can, and there was a lot of play in Lewis Carroll about the difference between the name of a song, or what I call the song versus what the name of the song is versus what other people call the name, etc. by another name. This is Lewis Carroll, you know. Um, um, so there's a long project and thinking about um, how we use words and 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 what can we rely on when we use a word to represent something. Um, and part of that project was beyond naming things correctly. That's one thing. That's what we get from the Bible, right? When with Genesis, that was part of the biblical project that God gave man, and well, man at that point, but gave humans the dominion over all the living creatures in the world, right? And part of that was naming them, to name the animals and living things. And this idea of logos, the name, is a foundation in Western philosophy. Saying that's what gives us the distinction, that we have power to we because we the fact that we can name things is part of what makes us superior as beings. And in China too, Confucius. I don't know if any. Well, I mean, Lo probably read some stuff, but in the Confucian tradition, one of the big projects for Confucius, or the Confucian tradition, I should say, was what's called rectification of names. Finding the proper way to name things was really kind of foundation of knowing also what is the right thing to do. So this is has been a really important project. Comes all the way down to the present. Question, well, especially now, with fake news and all. So one part is naming, and another part is kind of acting, but we'll say more as we go. But I just wanted to just give this kind of foreground. It's a really important project, and around 1900 or so, 1930s, there was this idea that maybe at least we could maybe get mathematics fixed. So when mathematicians write a squiggle, there's a definition of what it is, and then you can start to even prove theorems. this is a triangle. A, B, C are the points in the corners. And then you can prove theorems about triangles. So you start with some axiom. Um, or this is a circle, and then you can prove theorems about circles. So at least the thought was in mathematics, at least we can name things, we can define them. We have some rules by which you can establish properties, and you can prove things, prove theorems. So that was for all these years, all these centuries, kind of mathematics and mathematical thinking was kind of the model for being definite with language, and being able to go from truth to truth. Once I say, here's what the objects are, I can then derive, with a lot of work, all of these true statements about them. Um, so, even in the medieval period, during I'm thinking of specific people like Leibniz, who's one of the co-founders of calculus, right? But he was also a very important philosopher, right? Had this big project of a language that was like mathematics, but was general, that could use, maybe you could invent a kind of language that in which you could go from truth to truth, not just for triangles and mathematical objects, but for anything. So that was a big, big project. All right. You're not the only one. I'm just giving you kind of highlights. Okay. Give a really quick summary before Wittgenstein. So we come back up to the 1900s. So basically around then, that's when we started getting formal mathematics. Set theory, right? Everybody knows about Venn diagrams, right? Sets. Every single year, I remember going to a school. At the beginning of every year, every math course, they always started with sets. I don't know what people do these days, but anyway, so always set theory. And the other is logic. Logic. The famous one. This thing about Socrates? Anybody remember this kind of the classic syllogism?
Socrates is immortal. That one. Yeah. It's all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Sorry. Yes. Therefore, Socrates is mortal.
There you go. Okay. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Right. Classic example of syllogistic logic. So that's what I meant. You start with something true, and then you derive truth from truth. Okay, what Cameron gives us a very precise example of that. So, that has been a project through more than 2,000 years. Okay, up until Russell and Whitehead. Russell and Whitehead. So I'll put this name down here. So names: Leibniz, Russell, around 1920s. Okay, so, and the big project that Russell and Whitehead had was to at least found mathematics on set theory and logic. Okay, and that project was proving basic things like that there are integers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That you can build integers. Think about it. Like if all you have is a set of, this is what we should actually use a board for. Go to this. Here. Okay. Suppose all we have are why do we want to build out of the basic building blocks? Is because, well, what do you think? Here's another thing. Why do you think these people wanted to build things out of just very simple building blocks? All language. We have poetry, we have Dante, we have Shakespeare, we have paintings, right? But why do you think if the goal is to make some language that would be really reliable, you can go from truth to truth, why do you think people wanted to start with simple things, building blocks?
It's an interesting question because it might not actually lead to where you would want to go. I mean, there's an assumption that there are foundations upon which things are built. And therefore, if you can reach clarity at the foundations, then you can derive everything else from there, which is
Yeah.
sort of what like axioms are in formal theories.
Yeah. We're going to get to this in Wittgenstein again, but basically this is, suppose, we want to know what the right thing to do is, okay? Or we want to know what the world is made of. These are two very different kinds of projects. One is kind of normative, right? It has to do with the justice and doing good. The other has to do with metaphysics, what is the world made of? But also this question of know, like how do we know that that it's the right thing, or how do we know that this is the case? So that would be the domain of what's called epistemology. How do we know things? Okay. So let's repeat the question. So if we start with something, some basics, like this thing about Cameron's pointing out, start with breaking it down, into some basics, whatever they are. And maybe if we start from, let's say we start, just to say we start from something, all right? Does it make sense, right? That maybe we start with something that we know, which means that probably I'm mortal, I'm finite, I don't have infinite brain power, we don't, we're mortal. So it makes sense to start with something that we can handle, right? Small.
And agree, right? If this is a shared knowledge, right? So we have to agree. And if we start with the simpler things that we already agree on, then we can build from that more easily.
Okay. This is reasonable. It's reasonable to think this way. It's reasonable. So we start with something small, compact, that we can all agree on, that we can all grasp. All right. So that's what all these centuries and centuries of careful thinking have been grappling with. So what are your building blocks? Are we talking about humans? Are we talking about um, um, atoms? If we're talking about normative things, we can talk about rights, for example. Or if you talk about something religious, talk about soul, God, whatever. Okay, and they're not. If you talk about soul and God, you can say, "Hey, that's not small." This is that fundamental? Does that make just make a name God? Does it make it something we can grasp if we name it? Are we naming something infinite? Now we begin to get into Wittgenstein waters. Okay, like just because we name it with a very compact word, God, does that mean we really can grasp it? No. And then think, well, what about some other stuff? Maybe some other stuff is more concrete. Well, like what are some concrete or names of concrete things? What would you consider concrete?
Math.
Sorry?
Math.
M-A-T-H, math?
M-A-T-H, like how, how addition works, how subtraction works. I think that is a very concrete thing.
Let's take this up. We'll take a few examples, all right? Math, number, 5, 6, plus. Let's not even do plus yet. Let's just do numbers. To make, and those of you who've been looking at Wittgenstein already, you'll see this is going to get into some interesting waters. Just 5. You're trying to explain to, or maybe, well, okay, let's say 5. Well, yeah, let's say 5. Anything below 10 is kind of, concrete because of the fingers. So maybe we should say more than 21. Yeah. Yeah, let's say 5. How would you say this is concrete? The number 5, the concept 5. What do we mean if we say it's concrete?
I consider it quite abstract.
Why?
Well, I mean, sort of to play devil's advocate, but it seems quite abstract to me because fiveness is not inherent in anything. It's a kind of distinction that we use to characterize sets of things and compare it to other sets of things. And the fact that we can describe fiveness independent of what the object is, to me is kind of a characteristic of being abstract. I guess it's concrete in its simplicity, but I don't think it's concrete in that it actually is something that's like embedded in something, that it's some type of I'll stop there. I'm curious other people's.
Like it has to be taught. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, let's go to, okay, this is one description of how it could be abstract. Let's take out why one would think of this as concrete. 5 plus 7 equals 12. Is that right? Yeah. So that's supposed to be concrete. So Morgan, tell us,
Well,
how's that concrete?
I understand. I also agree with Cameron that the, math and just like theory of formula is kind of abstract, but the way that we've adopted it is very concrete. But yes, it does have to be taught. But as for, talking about why do we start with building blocks and finding something we all agree on, I think that, formulaic processes of math is one of those very concrete things. You learn it very, very early on and it never changes.
So we have
Yeah.
these different.
I would say it's concrete in that, yeah, it never changes, and it also is the same in any language. Yeah.
But I agree that like numbers, I feel like are abstract. So when I said math initially, I should have like talked about like formulas, if you will.
Well, isn't it in that sense, it's consistent because it's defined to be consistent. But if there would be situations where when we're using the number that we actually don't have consistency of instances. What would example be? I don't know, say there's we see a color wheel and someone's asked how many colors are on this, and it's like some continuous gradient. Where there would be a whole set of answers, probably very widely ranging. So that's interesting to me.
So this is good. These are two good interpretations already. They're both interesting, right? One is we can interpret 5 in such a way. I think there's a very precise way that Carmen pointed to, which can be applied to all sorts of sets of objects, and therefore it's not part of any of those objects. In that sense, it's abstract. I think you put it better than what I just did. And then concreteness, well, concreteness in terms of operations, like adding, multiplying. So, and these are things that any grade school kid could do. So it's concrete, it has this kind of social thing about education and social practices, and that are done customarily almost without thinking. So with small numbers, big numbers use a calculator. In any case, there's that kind of concreteness. In fact, maybe that's the distinction, right? I can do small sums, in my head, and then large sums I can't. So maybe large numbers are not as concrete to me. So not every number has that concreteness to it. So that begins to suggest that maybe concreteness has something to do with what people do, right? What can I do with it as a mortal being? Not me in some abstract sense of a thinking entity out there somewhere in some abstract sense. So concreteness, okay, concreteness.
Oh, sorry. I have a question. Could it be considered concrete if a non-thinking being like a calculator will always give you the same answer? So for like the bigger numbers, I guess to me that would, looking at it that way anyway, would still be concrete.
I mean, we are talking about math. I think math itself is a system. It has its own language. So for, let's say, some simple math, let's say number 5, it just has a representation in our real life. But itself is within the math system. Once you go deeper, you'll find less representation in real life.
Let's push this. Let's push this. What Rachel was saying. Suppose we have, 5 blocks, 5 rocks, and then above it 7 more rocks, and they all tumble down because of an avalanche, and we have 12 at the bottom of the hill. Is that addition? Is that a mathematical operation? I mean, just let's be reasonable. Okay, let's not try to push things too far. I mean, in that case, all right, would we call that like a calculator would push 5 plus 7 get 12? But is that an addition? Is that performing a mathematical operation in that case? What would we normally want to say? Normally. Not in philosophy course.
Yes.
No.
No.
Oh, we go. Now we have fun here. Well, right, because in other words, if we're doing some sort of geology and we're trying to illustrate mathematics, well, we could interpret it, yeah, sure. But otherwise, you just say it's a bunch of rocks falling down the hill. We could just, concreteness is interesting, right? Because we could say maybe concreteness has a sense of materiality to it, has a sense of that it's performed by living bodies. The word living is important, I guess, in this case of mathematics. Now, calculator. This is interesting. Calculator. Okay. Now, what about a calculator? It's not a bunch of rocks that could be no humans were in the universe, right? And still 5 rocks and 7 rocks fell down into a pile of 12 rocks, right? There's another way to test this. But with a calculator, that's a whole different story, isn't it? Right. What's running besides electronics, besides the electrons, okay, and the silicon, et cetera, doped silicon. What makes the calculator do its thing in terms of the operations? Conceptually, what's going on here? Conceptually. The difference between a calculator doing calculation 5 plus 7 equals 12 and the jumble of rocks. Conceptually, what do you see as what are the big differences in these two?
Well, calculator is translating some symbols that we have for representing things we can count and translating it into a binary language and then operating on that and then translating it back into our symbolic language.
That's a big step, A to D, D to A. And then the keyword operating. How does that work? What's going on there? When we say operating? In general terms, conceptually, what's going on when we say a calculator is operating on some registers in its memory. It could be something more complicated than a calculator, but calculator, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm old enough to have written, as oops, I just said it, as exercises, my own calculator, So people used to do that. That was kind of their hello world, make a calculator program. You write code. Somebody wrote the code, right? Somebody wrote some code. It's code. And what is the code? It's a manifestation of an algorithm, instantiation of an algorithm, right? An algorithm would be this kind of manipulations of formal structures. Okay, So it's interesting because a code, right, piece of code is in a concrete okay implementation of an abstract algorithm of an algorithm. So we're actually we are working with simple manipulations. Okay, so it is interesting. Certainly, it's not a matter of F equals ma in terms of rocks falling on other rocks and tumbling them down and reducing total um, um, kinetic energy again. So, there's a whole different story. Physics, there's no physics in this case with the algorithm. But now we go back to Russell and Whitehead. Okay. With Russell and Whitehead and what was called their big project was to take not all language, but just mathematical language. Like Tanya pointed out in the chat, which is very good point. They wrote a gigantic book called the Principia Mathematica to okay, here. So yeah, I should get a bigger thing. So starting with sets, which means things like this, right? Like Venn diagrams, sets A, B, C, and then you have notion of intersection, right? This kind of stuff. Can you see this? Better?
Yeah.
All right. Well, just a shadow now. Whoops. Yeah. Okay. So intersection, union, this kind of stuff. Okay. Sets, just sets. And also this notion of logic that Cameron's pointing out, like, if P implies Q, this kind of stuff. Okay. Logic sets. There's not much to go on because here you notice there's we don't even have numbers yet. We don't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So to give you some idea of the barehandedness, abacus, I'll come back to that. That's a great idea. That's a great example. Basically, what it started out was the empty set. Kind of the most, you would think that that's kind of the most simple thing possible you can possibly imagine, which is the empty set, which is kind of like also called this, right? The zero with a cross through it, feet. So that was what they started with. And then if you start with nothing, this kind of nothing, you can make the set of the nothing, which is this right here, right? And then you can think about, well, now that you have this thing, this empty set, you can make it the set of you can make sets out of it. You can begin to build up these chains of sets, okay? But then you can identify them with numbers, okay? So you say, let's call this 0, all right? And then we make a set of it, let's call that 1. And then you can begin to think about this. You can make the set of 0 and 1 and label that 2. And then you can begin to go on from there and chain it up, okay? But then, as Tanya pointed out, it takes a long time if you can get to prove things like 1 + 1 = 2, because you have to build up the notion of addition, blah, 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 things like that. So, but it's barehanded, and they really, went sort of far into arithmetic. But here's the problem. I'll turn this off now. Is that they ran into a big, well, they didn't, somebody else, Gödel, pointed out this basic problem, which is that what about the set of all sets? So does a set of all sets contain itself? And this has no resolution, this question. Anybody know a version of this in ordinary language, of this basic problem? It's a riddle. There are riddles that are equivalent to this. About, but anybody know, you probably know this, the barber question. If a barber, this is a patriarchal riddle. Okay, if a barber in a village, okay, shaves only those who do not shave themselves. Question is, let's say this is the barber. Okay, that's the rule. Here's a barber. The barber only shaves those who do not shave themselves. That's why they go to the barber, right? Question: does a barber shave himself? What's the answer to that? But try it out. Somebody said, if yes, right, if the barber does, you say yes. Oh, then the barber shaves himself, so he's not going to go to the barber, but he's the barber. If you say no, well, then he's in the class of people who go to the barber because they don't shave themselves, so they go to the barber. Oops. Okay. There are many versions of this. The logical version of this is the question: take a set, consider the set of all sets. Oh, wait a minute, sorry. The set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does the set contain itself? Okay. This is irresolvable. This is called Russell's paradox, actually. So this became kind of the landmine, really, that destroyed over 2,000 years of work of trying to get to a utterly rock solid form of logical derivation going from truth to truth. Okay, there are separate problems. One problem is, can you even represent something? So that's why it's, oh, let's start with set theory. Let's start with empty set even, not even all sets yet, just empty set. And we can is a way to build up bigger and bigger sets out of that. That already was brilliant work, and kind of Zen even, right? But the second step was, how can you actually are these theories actually complete, it's called, and they're not. Okay. So I harp on this because, all computer programming languages, I said this before probably, are versions of a way of describing sentences in a logical form, with a basic set of entities, basic set of operators, and they have these kind of operations you can apply to the entities, et cetera, right? I described that. So they're like a mechanical implementation of a much more general class of languages, which are these formal languages. Okay, there's a name for that kind of language, and a mechanical implementation of a larger class of logical operations. Okay, and we already have these theorems that say they cannot actually generate, or rather, even worse, you can generate statements in any of these languages that cannot be proven within that language, even though you can state them. Okay. So it's actually, this puts a very strong limit. So they basically, there are another version of this is that there is no general algorithm that can tell us whether can compute a definite answer to every computable problem. There's no such thing. Okay. So this is really fundamental. Okay. Fundamental. So let's go. I propose this. I propose that I don't know who's had a chance to look a little bit at some of these paragraphs from Wittgenstein yet, because I propose to use our time to do that today. Okay, and maybe in a couple of different chunks. Lots of great stuff here, but I wanted to. Oops. Oh, 2 pages are gone. Oh. Okay. Right. I'm thinking that maybe we could try to give some time to look at some passages, give you guys some time to refresh on some passages, and then come back together. I mean, we'll just keep everything going right now. But I'm thinking of maybe drawing attention to certain things. So for example, okay, the basic question here is, how do words mean something? Okay. And I'm thinking that maybe we could start by looking at the basic examples that Wittgenstein gave us. Maybe we can start from there. And does anybody want to describe that kind of starting point for Wittgenstein? What kind of
So what was the question again?
I think he froze.
Oh,
It was, what do words mean, and discuss some of the examples that he gave.
Oh yeah, he's gone. Usually I'm the one with internet problems.
I'm back.
He's back.
You see me?
Yeah.
Okay, good, good, good.
Yes.
My question is, what does he start with as a kind of, because the question is, how do words mean anything? Okay, so what's Wittgenstein's starting point as kind of the very first page, what's his basic toy example that he starts with? Somebody can describe it.
Builder A and builder B.
And what do they do?
Pretty much he's talking about how, well, the preface of the example is the language and words with meaning are supposed to serve as like a method of communication.
And
then there's
what do they do? What's the concrete?
A game?
Yeah, what's the game that they do?
So they're using sounds to instruct an action, right? And
they're just naming things, right?
they're naming things.
Rock, pillar, slab, beam.
it's funny.
All right. So, and then what the other person does is, they're making something, right? They're building a house, and the other person just hands B hands A, the object that A names. Simple enough, right? So that's what it starts drilling down in. Okay. So I'd like you to look at your copies, or you know what, we can, okay, here, I'll just share screen. I'll just share screen here. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So what are some ways to explain how B understands what A means when A says pillar or block? All right. Can you imagine turning around and trying to teach it to somebody else, to a kid or somebody new to this group, the tribe? So what are some ways that you can imagine, or Wittgenstein was imagining, how you would teach this language, this kind of language, to somebody else? And what are some ways?
He said that a little before this, he was talking about basically it's a training process. You say a word, you point to an object, you do that enough, and the two become associated and correlated with each other.
Okay, so one day is you point to it. Okay, so you can say, okay, so I'm gonna teach somebody else. So B trains C and say, here's what you do. And then, and basically B says pillar by pointing to it. And then if you read ahead, you can think about, what's the problem here? If you just point to the pillar, okay, and say pillar, what might C start thinking or doing? Okay. No. If I say I want to teach C how to play this language game, meaning being an assistant to the assistant, or being an assistant to A, and start handing pillars and beams to A, and B says, here, let me show you how this works. And B points to pillars, this pillar. B points to beam, says beam. What do you think C might start to do? What could C do in response to that, those kinds of activities?
I mean, so the pillar is performing a function, and C might understand this as pointing to something that performs that function. They might understand it as stone or wood or the material that it's made of. They could not be, like we were talking about sets before, they might not be putting it in the same set of things.
Well, for example, you can say learning names. Like this question here is about signification, right? Maybe I can say, I say pillar when I point to pillar, I say beam when I point to beam, but C can look at me and say, can even repeat beam, maybe, but how would, maybe, maybe not, okay? It's not a given that C will know to say beam just because I said beam, okay? Also, even if C were to say beam, C could just say beam, and then I still don't have an assistant.
Right.
I still don't have another assistant can help make my job easier to assist A. So I have a person who impaired me, and so what? You see. So then, what else would I have to do? Well, that's where we're talking about this and that, right? For example, here A gives an order like D slab there, right? D meaning in this case what, like a 5 or number, So, and there means put it somewhere. Okay. So how would you learn that? Well, and this is where, you can start looking at it. Like D, in this case, the example is A, B, C, D, right? So thinking that A means 1, B means 2 of them, C means 3 of them, D means 4 of them. You start to break it down, it becomes really difficult actually to think how to actually teach this to a naive C who doesn't know even this notion of counting. Right. Right. It's going to be characteristic when Wittgenstein, he starts with these concrete examples. And then I kind of give a tour of how to get into Wittgenstein, right? And then we say, well, number 10, he says, oh, well, the way this is working is that slab signifies that object, or beam signifies that other object. And this is where Wittgenstein starts getting into gear. So, well, what the hell do we mean by signify? Okay. And then he will go through some analysis of what we think is going on when we say signification. Let me see here. And he comes to a very negative conclusion. Okay. Because, for example, you could have said some other blah, 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 DDD, cuckoo, right? And just by making this relationship doesn't really mark out what signification really does. Okay. And here it says that just to say that every word in language signifies something, we haven't said anything yet. Okay. And this is interesting. This is really key because we have, if you look at in computer science and artificial intelligence, one of the big issues for AI was to think that AI is actually intelligence. And there's a very famous set of our researchers, psychologists, Newell and Simon. I'll put this name into chat. We should put in the board. Write this down here. Newell and Simon, who invented what they called the physical symbol hypothesis. Anybody read about this symbol hypothesis? This is kind of one of the most famous, beginnings of AI. Basically, Newell and Simon said what computers do is they are machines for, well, actually, not computers. What thinking is basically a physical manipulation of symbols. Okay, they have a little bit more elaborate definition. And that's what we are physical. We manipulate symbols. Computers are physical. They manipulate symbols. We think, they're ipso facto, computers think. Okay, I'm giving a very short, concrete cartoon of it. Okay. Right. But this kind of talk, the kind of grammatical construction of parallelism is what Wittgenstein explodes. Okay. So I want you to read this carefully yourselves, but basically the reason why I start with philosophical investigations is because he's actually taking apart, destroys utterly this kinds of reasoning that theorists are making and drawing conclusions that are not defensible because it's what he calls a grammatical error. Okay. Right. And then these examples, he puts up all these counter examples that shows how it kind of leads to absurdities. Please, Cameron, did you have something to add?
Oh, it's not exactly what Wittgenstein is alluding to, but there's this very interesting anthropologist.
Let me show you how we
Daniel Everett, who he's like a linguistic anthropologist. He was the first person to translate a language called
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Named translate a language called Piraha, which was Amazonian language. And he's not translating Piraha in this video, but it's an example of this what's called like totally blanking on the word, but it's a way of coming to learn a language without speaking any of it and without the speaker knowing any of your language. And it's quite fascinating to see what he picks up over the course of an hour by just like pointing at things and just like he's saying random words or random sounds that are, it's supposed to be as if you were speaking English, but he's like pointing to a pencil, and then he points to a different pencil and repeats the word that the other speaker is saying that's what pencil means, and then he like drops the pencil, and then he eventually comes up with more complicated sentences from that, and that's how he learned to speak Piraha fluently after a few years, which
Yeah. So I think thanks for the link. So we put this into the Padlet too, so we have it to look at it. So we can go on to maybe more richer set of language games. Thanks, Cameron. So here, for example, in 23, he talks about these other kinds of activities, and it's right here, giving orders versus describing the appearance of an object versus constructing an object from a drawing, versus reporting an event, Caesar died, versus speculating about an event, maybe the weather will be clear tomorrow or something. But these are all really different kinds of language, and they're not of language actions, and they're all quite different. So it's really hard to have one theory to accommodate that. So it calls these different kinds of language names, all right? So that's something else. And this thing about like a word, you can say, well, maybe how do you make a word mean something? Let's go back to maybe thinking ourselves. How else could we teach somebody the meaning of a word or of a sentence? One thing is to point, right, and say something. Okay. Well, here's the thing. Wittgenstein later on has this example where he says something like, you point to a chair, you say chair, and then the chair disappears. What happens to your word? Because you said you mean by chair that object sitting right there next to me. Okay, but that's the definition by reference. But if that object doesn't exist anymore, does the word chair still have a meaning? Well, what would you like to say? What would we like to say to be the case? We'd like it to be the case. Otherwise, right? Because otherwise I can't even say the chair disappeared. Right?
Right.
So that means that the definition by reference doesn't work. So, but then you say, well, what are we referring to?
Well,
So
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just, a lot of this is bringing, so I've raised 2 children now, right? So watching a baby acquire language and how that develops is, you see a lot of things. And one of my son in particular was, it was several very funny things happened as they begin to add to their language. A lot of misunderstandings will happen. His father at the time would play basketball and get injured quite a lot. He rolled his ankle and then he kept doing it over and over. And then one day Jordan fell down, hurt his elbow or something, and came running into me, mommy, I have an ankle. Right? And so, yeah, he had his own word, it wasn't quite right, but it was very funny. He also told me one day we were at the park and we were walking, he was like, mommy, I'm glad I'm in preschool. I'm learning how to push myself. And I thought, oh, my son is old soul. He's just brilliant. And then I was telling someone about it and he maybe overheard me and goes, yeah, you just push your feet out in front of you and then pull them behind you and put them in front of you and pull them behind you. And I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, just really, there's something there that I don't know how to quite describe. But
It's fascinating, and I actually think this is just perfect because I actually am fascinated by the age when babies are, I have 2 kids, so the age when they start to understand what you're saying, but they can't say anything yet. They don't say language yet, but they understand perfectly everything you say, it's just amazing.
That's like freshmen, right? Like 18-year-olds.
I guess it happens at every age, actually. So now I remember my boy Gabriele when he was toddling, so he's almost 1. Okay, and there were these pots and pans that they love to play with. Okay, but we kind of made it so that there's only one shelf with pots and pans that you could play with, and the other pots and pans he was supposed to not touch. Okay, so we would say at some point, okay, he wanted to bang on something, so go over there. Say, go over there. Did I point or not point? Probably did point, so they gave it away. Anyway, so I said you can play with pots and pans in the bottom shelf, and just went over there, and started taking them out one by one, like that, one by one. This is very young, okay? So it wasn't clear that he had a vocabulary. He didn't have a vocabulary, right? So that's one thing. So absolutely, it's fascinating. Also, this question about overgeneralization. The transposition is one thing. There's another, which is overgeneralization, where when he was a bit older, maybe more like, I don't know, 2 or 3, there weren't that many Chinese around because his mother's Italian. So they're watching TV at some point, and there was a show showing the Shanghai acrobatic troupe. So the stage with maybe 40 acrobats, Chinese acrobats doing amazing things. And he said in Italian to his mom, guarda, tanti Xin Wei, so many Xin Weis. Look at all these Xin Weis there on stage. So overgeneralization. So these are the kinds of things we can look at maybe to see how maybe the theories that we have for language learning, they don't maybe generalize completely. But please.
I want to come back. Maybe we're going to come back to this anyway, but you brought up the reference of the chair disappearing, and then does our word lose its meaning? And I kind of wanted to connect this back to, at some point he talks about remembering, and why, just because the reference is gone, if we're looking at human language, why does the meaning have to be gone? Because we remember the reference, even if it's not there anymore. And at some point he talks about like learning what remembering feels like and what it means. And I don't remember the details specifically, but yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting connection between the 2 different points. And I feel like humans remembering is a big part of what gives language meaning.
Yeah, I think we could go even further in terms of remembering. So say, well, how do we know that a person remembers the meaning? So, how would we check that? Well, it's a question. What do you think?
I mean, I guess I think it's kind of an assumption. It's like a part of our nature and evolution and maybe a part of what makes humans special. I think we have a longer memory than, like, what do they say? A fish remembers 7 seconds, a cat remembers like 30 hours. I don't know. I feel like I've heard random things like that, but um just different species have different length memories, and that ours is on the longer end of that.
Remember the weird paper that we looked at? And this is probably also applies to any kind of perceptual cognitive tests, especially across species, because you have to look very carefully on what the test is. Because, for example, if it's something like remembering certain kind of, I don't know, sugar or something in the fluid, that might be a different test than remembering to see something visually. It's a different test. So the question of memory could be very much tied into modality of perception, and also what physical actions the organism has to change the relationship of the organism to the world. So there's this. That's why I put in that link to sensory motor research in our Padlet.
Yeah.
Regan. It's worth looking at to go down that track.
No, I thought that this was really interesting with what you posted, Rachel, in the Padlet with like the knowing of clarinet music, or what a clarinet sounds like, as opposed to, because, like, sorry if there's people talking in the background. If you could listen to, I mean, I'm sure all of us have had situations where we're hearing some like classical music play in the background and we're like, oh, I recognize that, but I have no idea what that is. I can't name who the composer is or what the name of that title is. And so there's some type of memory which is elicited just because we have exposure to it. And then there's memory where we can specifically name and then kind of manipulate the object because we can name it. I don't know. I think there's something there.
So
Yeah.
let's
Oh, sorry.
look.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's really like hearing music and having that trigger like recognition, and it reminds me. I was thinking about this the whole time I was reading this. I mentioned on the Padlet too that my dance troupe, we do an improvisational dance form. We learn a vocabulary, and then when we perform, it's not choreographed, but it looks like it is quite often, because we've practiced a lot, and it's not just my troupe, but it's a dance form that people do all over the world. So I have gone to Mexico, to Paris, and show up with people I've never met before, and we can immediately begin dancing in this format, right? And there's initially when you're learning, you're thinking a lot about what's going on. You're using a lot of words in your head, but at some point that turns off, and you know what to do without actually doing anything that I would call thinking.
Yeah, and then thinking about memory, we should. I think it'd be helpful to, because we're running short on time for this, but it'd be helpful maybe to look at the different passages where Wittgenstein talks about memory or remembering, and to see how it gets really, really complicated. So in other words, the criterion of using the memory to decide on whether this person understands a word, it can replace one problem with an even bigger problem, which is, how do we know this person is remembering? And it'll come back down to, well, that's what I was asking. How do we check that? Well, we check that by seeing what the person does, And this brings it right down to kind of the core takeaway, I would say, from Wittgenstein, from philosophical investigations, is that at a few key places, he was going to say, look, at some point, the only way to really know what the meaning is to see that word deployed, is to deploy the word, to actually use the word, its use, USE, use. It's even more than observing the use, it's to use the word. So he uses little compact ways of saying it, like saying something like along the lines of to understand a sentence is to know the language in which the sentence is used, and to understand the language is to master some techniques, ways to manipulate situations. It's very interesting to go from there. It's not like going to understand language is to understand logic. No, it goes to understand language is to master technique. Sorry, Morgan.
Well, I just kind of have an example of how you know a person is remembering. So my athletic background is in martial arts, and I did it for 12 years and whatnot. And you know, the studio that I went to, they exclusively spoke Japanese in class for instruction. And obviously I didn't go in speaking Japanese at all, but I started obviously to correlate the sounds and the words once, you know, they were spoken and what that means and what that movement looks like and stuff. So that's kind of my experience of remembrance that relates to this. So how you know if someone is remembering, I think it is really just based on their reaction. And I think that's a very simple understanding of it, but I don't have a more complex understanding of it.
And reaction in this case is also action, right? So that was how are people doing things?
Right.
Let me move on to this question of language games, because along the way, Wittgenstein points to different kinds of examples, toy models of usage of language, and this is a simple one, very small one, number 27 here. It's these, because at the beginning, he's at that point still saying, oh, well, maybe we can understand what words mean by pointing to something, or we can understand what words mean by using them as labels of, okay, labels. And then he points out these things like, ouch, help, fire, these kind of exclamations, right? And they're not labels per se, right? They're kind of ejaculation, like ouch, oops, like that kind of thing. So that's all he's pointing out here, is that these exclamations are different kinds of languaging than, slab, beam, all right? Or even put that there. Okay, so these are all very different kinds of languages. And then it comes to a really nice example, which I wanted to get to before we break. It's here, 31. Okay. And maybe just I'm marking that now, but you remember the story here for chess? Just imagine this. If you wanted to explain to somebody else how to play chess, how would you go about it? A board game, how would you go about explaining?
Well, he kind of talks about how part of that depends on what they come in already knowing and what you're assuming they already come in knowing. So do they already know what a board game is? Do they already know what the pieces mean, or do they need to, how far from scratch do they need to start?
So what are some procedures that he talks about one could try doing?
Like the king, say they know what the king is, but they don't know what it does. You would say the king moves this way. Yeah.
The first step I would be is to pick up the piece and say, this is the king, probably.
Yeah.
Right? You would name them. This is the pawn, this is the king, this is the rook. That's probably the first step, right? And you can say, this is called the king. Fine. And then, so, right, they can say, oh, I know the names now, but they still wouldn't know how to play chess, right? So naming is not sufficient already.
I think you have to show too. I wouldn't be able to teach someone how to play chess just by talking about it, right? I would want to physically set up the board and go through a few of the movements with that person if they had never.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, haven't we had this? I mean, haven't you? I've had this experience where, with a new card game, for example, you can read the rules, or somebody can tell you the rules, say da 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 da, and then say, well, you know what? Let's just play, and now learn as we go. Isn't that easier? I mean, for me, it's easier actually. Oftentimes, just just let's just play and follow along and pick it up. Later on, maybe you can tell me the rules, and then they'll make sense. Interesting.
I feel like for chess too, like sure you can even teach them the rules by showing, but a big part of chess is strategy.
Yeah.
So that's complex on how to teach
Yeah.
someone.
So for example, what is the rule? I mean, I think during break, we'll take some break. Maybe I can ask you to look at some passages and maybe with a certain intent. And I think maybe rules is not a bad place to start. So I'll point out the sections where they talk about it. We can just search for it inside your PDFs. But going back to what Morgan was just saying, okay, we're teaching someone how to play chess. Naming the pieces, it's a step, not sufficient. Even telling them how each piece moves is now it's beginning to be kind of a rule, but it's a rule per piece, right? Here's how it moves, not sufficient. The knight goes like this, can leap over things, pawns only go. So telling them how to move a piece seems like it's already, performative, is technique, isn't it? Doesn't tell them how to play chess. What else? Maybe some more.
What are the goals? Like what are the impacts and what are the goals?
Yes. What are the goals? And still it's not strategy. We can say the goal is, to checkmate the king or something like that. And still not strategy. We can keep going more. So at some point we can start putting in some rules. The rules for moving a particular piece are pretty concrete. But the rules for strategy, that's a whole different story. Okay, whole different story. And then we can begin to ask, suppose we have like a chess playing program, but it can beat most human beings, probably all but a few. Is it playing chess? You see. Same thing goes for large language models too, right? What are called stochastic parrots. So we're going to get into the situation where even with Wittgenstein early on, this is philosophical investigations, right? He's going to be looking at, well, maybe the difference between what we think we're doing when we're languaging, not what language is, but what we're doing when we're languaging activity versus doing table lookup or following rules. Okay. So let's use this as a cadence, as a breakpoint. Okay. So let's see. Let's take a 10-minute break, maybe 10-minute break. And during that time, and when we come back to, we'll do some more. I'd like to look at what another way that maybe we can think that language works, one could theorize language works, which is looking for the rules of language, that maybe there are some rules that either can define what certain pieces of language mean, or can relate between the squiggles and what we're supposed to do. Okay. And you can just search for, like I said, but maybe I can show you in your screen notes. Some of the passages are. Notes here. Pages. Here, okay, share. Okay, can you see the text? I'm sorry, it's a little small. Oh, here. Here, okay. Right. Okay, I'll put them into chat. Okay, 53, 58. Okay, basically on rules. And then there's another set of passages that have to do with with oh, you mentioned the clarinet sound thing. This is another set of examples of different kinds of languaging to say that, you know, you to say how many feet Mont Blanc the mountain is, or versus to say how the clarinet sounds. And also just thinking that, knowing something, like knowing how many feet versus saying something. This is the difference between knowing and saying these different kinds of sentences. Okay, so rules. There was another passage. Oh, here we are. Right here. Okay. Put that into chat as well. So I like to zoom there after the break. So maybe if you want to get a head start on that, I would recommend that you review those passages. Okay, let's take a break. 10 minutes. I'll see you. I was thinking about the number 5 at the beginning of the discussion and thinking about colors. And Wittgenstein has this really nice passage where he talks about colors and say, well, maybe we learned colors by pointing at, like red, by pointing at a red leaf. Remember that? There's a passage there. And wow, yeah. I mean, you can say it's a quality, but you don't say where it is. It's like 5 doesn't have a locus. In that sense, like Cameron was saying, it's abstract because it doesn't have a locus. That's another way in which it is abstract. Colors like this too. So how do we show people what's
isn't color slightly different because it, I mean, the color itself, probably you're correct, but there is the essence of the color, which is the wavelength.
Yes. When then but then color, the red, sorry, not color, I should say red, what we call red. Then saying that because you can say, then you can flip it around. You can say, well, this instrument is measuring whatever, 4,400 angstroms or whatever it is. And that's what color is. That's what red is. But then I already know what red is. You see, and I build all these instruments and it gives me a number associated with what I call red. You can flip it around. And historically, that's what happens, right? But then it still comes back to the question as well, you know, how do I teach somebody else what red means? Usually by pointing to some things that are red, right? So then Wittgenstein says, okay, you point to some red leaves, or you can point to some red pieces of cloth that are, and you say, well, do you use color chips like rectangles? And then they might think, oh no, so you mean those rectangular objects with this particular sort of item, that's what I call reds. No, I don't mean the shape. I don't mean the shape. Ignore the shape. And how do you get people to ignore the shape? Well, you maybe get these ragged pieces. And then maybe red means irregularity or a certain kind of, you know, that's where it gets interesting.
I think this is where difference, you can teach color because if everything else is the same and you have things of, you know, 5 different colors, you distinguish red from the other colors because the objects that are red or green or blue or whatever else are the same, except for this apparent feature that is the color.
And then we have 5 rectangles. Suppose we have 5 rectangles and they're different colors, and we named them, you know, red, green, blue, orange. And then again, you see the same, even the way in which they're the same, they're all rectangles, could be learned as part of the definition of color. That's what I mean. It's very delicate. That's what Wittgenstein was pointing to.
Yeah, like ankles.
You know, the fact that but then we give them leaves and they won't know anymore to apply this to leaves.
But then you you apply it to something else, and then you do that again to some other set of objects, and it reveals itself.
Well, that's the magic, right? And then some magic happens and they reveal, that's it. See, that's the thing. And it reveals itself. And this now brings us to rules. Okay, let's say this because this okay, and dot 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 the ellipsis. Okay, and then so okay. I just think it's very funny. I mean, like, okay, I can't resist. Number 60, paragraph 60. This is just along the way. Sorry, I can't.
60?
Yeah, 60. I can't resist because it's just so hilarious. Okay, 60. When I say my broom is in the corner, is this really about a statement? Is this really a statement about the broomstick and the brush? You know? What do I mean if I further analyze this? What do I mean to further analyze the statement? Well, the broom is there. If the broom is there, that surely means that the stick and the brush must be there, and in a particular relationship to one another, you know, and that this was, as it were, hidden in the sense of the first sentence and expressed in the analyzed sentence. This is I'm pointing to this part here. Okay, so that means when somebody who says the broom is in the corner really means that the broomstick is there and so is the brush. And also the broomstick is fixing the brush. Is he actually saying all these other things too, just by saying the broom is in the corner? I mean, this is way before machine learning, right? But I just think it's hilarious because these kinds of some of the knowledge maintenance, some of the biggest knowledge maintenance systems in the 20th century were built with these kinds of statements of fact. The biggest one was done by Doug Lannett. It's in Texas. And these knowledge maintenance systems, unlike statistical methods of machine learning, they really try to store in these AI systems statements of fact about the world. And it was a funny story. There's a kind of famous story in the AI world where they asked this CYC system to make some inferences. So they said, well, George Washington, when George Washington stepped into Washington D.C., when he put his right foot over the lake, over the river onto Washington D.C. Sorry, maybe how did you ask this question? Right. George Washington entered the state. Okay, let's say DC. His right foot is in the state. What can you say most likely about his left foot? And the system could not give an answer because the system was told these two facts. Washington is in the state, right foot is in the state, but it could not make the inference that most likely the left foot is in the state as well. Okay, it had to be told that the left foot is in the state. And this is the problem with these kinds of knowledge maintenance systems, which are just made of a set of facts. Okay, but then you can say, oh, well, then just teach it more. Give it the rule, right? The rule is a human being, normal human being, not a fully able human being. If the right foot is in a certain location, very likely the left foot is there as well. Okay, we're endless. Where do you stop? You see.
So it seems like there's this thing that's happening with language that's a mediation between what is happening in my mind, whatever we're gonna define that to be, but my mind and the outside world. And this AI that you're referring to has no outside world. There is no interaction with the outside world.
This is going to be a key point later on too. Next time, our next topic of discussion is going to be experience. Today we talk about language, representation, this kind of stuff. Next topic will be William James and essays on radical empiricism and how to think about things starting from this notion of experience. Okay, so that's a good point. We go back to this question about inferences, or sorry, how do we tell that somebody has got it? Okay, and I think the basic example that one of the basic examples that Wittgenstein uses for, in this case, a basic language game is numbers, a sequence of numbers. Where is it? I have all my notes in front of me, but I don't have a big enough table. Does anybody remember the sequence of numbers? There's your person is writing down numbers, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, come on. It starts before 143, but it's probably, ooh, yeah, 143. That's like paragraph 143. 143. I'll put it on the screen, but you guys should look at it yourselves. I think it's easier that way. Okay. Oh, and the scan is incorrect. Sorry. 0, 1, 2. This should be 0 and 1, not 0, not O and I. Sorry. Whoops. Don't do that. Take it off.
Yeah, that was entertaining to
Bad bug. Sorry about that. Yeah, entertaining. Do you remember the story here, Cameron? Oh God, this is a bad bug for preview, that it actually highlights everything. Okay. I know, it's a really bad preview, a really bad bug in preview. So you can't read this anymore. Oh well, hope you can read it. You better look at it on your own screens because my preview is now buggy. Remember what the story was in this case? So a person says, a person writes down 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh yeah. Why do I say it? I can actually show it. Hang on. And meanwhile, you guys should look up paragraph 143. Here's what's going on. And so I write down like this sequence 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I say copy this sequence. And this other person looking at me, and maybe I'll just make it up. Okay, it's gonna do something like 0, 2, 4, 6. I say, hey, wait a minute. I say, you dropped out the odd numbers, but maybe the person says, well, I'm copying you. I'm actually using a regular rule to how I interpret copy, which is to copy every other integer. That's what copy means to me, right? Or it could be something else. I mean, in other words, the person is actually following a deterministic procedure to copy, okay? And it's a rule. And Wittgenstein can say, does this mean this person is understanding, this language game, copy, right? If you say that to understand means to follow a rule or to interpret a rule, and he actually asks, what does it mean to interpret? And what does it mean to follow a rule? So he goes into a second order analysis. What does it mean to follow or to interpret? Okay. So I can say that maybe using kind of rule-based behavior, and mind you, if you think about algorithms are rules, constitutes understanding. He puts some skepticism into that. Okay.
Are you writing anything?
Sorry?
Oh yeah. We can't see the other
paper.
Are you seeing pink letters on white?
Yes.
Okay, that's all it is.
Oh, okay.
I'm not showing the PDF anymore because my PDF has got too much highlighting in it. Okay. All right. So then it goes on. Because the rules could be much more complicated. It could be maybe something like this, x squared plus x plus 1, In other words, whatever I see up here, I put in 1 or 2 or 3 for x. So this is a rule. And maybe I generate whatever this polynomial gives me. And I write down the results. And that's what I mean by copy. Okay. So it can be arbitrary to the point where it might seem random to the observer. And yet it's fully determined. Okay. Now it gets into even more interesting waters. Let me try to find it if I can say. Oh, I'm so sorry. This is 151 and 150. You know what? If somebody else can share screen with their uncorrupted PDF, that would be very helpful and gives me a chance to. Thank you. Thank you. So, great. Thank you. So 150, 151. You see what they're, can you take a look at that? And this describes kind of what they're doing corporeally with this exercise. Okay, let me go to Zoom, see what you have. See, how do you know? How can we tell that this second person knows or understands the first person? And then he's saying, right? Maybe to know means the person can do something, right? Mastery of a technique. So then he says, well, maybe the second person says, oh, I can't do it now. I can do it. I got it, you know. And then how would you know? Well, that person starts writing down a sequence of numbers and maybe continues the sequence that you expect. Okay. And then he goes on to sort of question that. What do you mean that this person is now understanding? This is 151 here. So then they say things like, well, now we compare, saying, I understand this, compare that with saying, I'm in pain. I have been in pain, or I was depressed, you know. And then you can say, well, maybe if you make them the same kind of statement, you can say, well, I was in pain, but I had a headache. I had a headache, but it's getting less and less. But if you say that it's the same kind of claim as saying, I understand it, but would you say, I got it, and then I got it less and less? No. And he's basically arguing in this section later on, 153 through 154. And the way you read Wittgenstein, you can read, he's very careful at dismantling certain kinds of common interpretations. Thank you, Lo. All right. For example, one might say, oh, this is a mental process or mental state, the state of understanding, as if it were like pain as a state. Okay. And so, well, maybe that's not going to hold up if you look at it more carefully. And that's what this passages 152 to 154 are. Okay. And down here, oh, I can't get back to it. Let me try to share now, Flo, because I got a clean copy back. Okay, thanks. Yeah, okay. Here. And you see over and over again, Wittgenstein is going to pay attention to looking at particular situations, particular circumstances, some particular tangible points, instead of thinking about mental processes. Okay, appealing to some abstract, general theoretical construction like mental process. Okay. Okay. Eleven, 12. So what else does he say about rules that we can pick up? I mean, you can probably search for it faster than I can. If you look at for example, suppose a person, you write down 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I should change cameras. I see. I should change cameras to me. Suppose, I write down 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And or whatever, whatever sequence I want to invent. The person up to the 100th place is doing, quote, according to me, the right thing. All right. Like they copy out 0 through 99. And then suddenly they come out with a whole different number, minus 27.3, and say, whoa, what's going on here? I mean, you were following me until suddenly according to the rule that I thought you understood, you say you understand the rule, but then you put down this number. Well, he could say anything, really. You could say, well, I have a rule. The rule is follow Xin Wei until 100, but at 100, the rule should be 27.3. And that's a rule. I'm just following it. Right? So, and everything's perfectly clear to him. And I'm looking for the passage I think is really, really great. Talking about, in other words, it's really impossible to distinguish between somebody following a rule and somebody not following a rule, actually, in practice. In fact, it's not really possible to distinguish by observation whether this person is acting in error or not. Okay, so this is the part where it gets really deep waters. So let me see if I can find the part where. $199. Here we go. Let me go find it. Okay. As you get to 199, he's going to here. Let me just share screen again. Look at this. Okay. So the kind of the paragraphs before 199, I'm going to just point out as we go. Okay. What he's doing is he's looking very, very carefully on like what we might be doing when we're reading something, interpreting what we read. Okay. So, and he asks you to do certain things like, maybe it's not this passage, I'll see for earlier. Trying to think about reading a statement, reading some sentence and thinking the sentence. Okay. I'm looking for the. Oh, here we go. Here. Okay. To say, look, suppose you see some words like the cat is on the mat, and I say, I know what I'm reading, because they say, well, what's the relationship between what I'm seeing in front of me, the words in piece of paper, and what's going on in what's my what am I thinking as I read this? And you can say, well, you can say in this case, he's criticizing this phrase, I'm guided by what I see, right here. Okay. And then that's what this paragraph is about. Say, well, maybe that's not really enough. And that's why reading this is important. Okay. And then here, with the example of saying the person's watching you do something, write down some sequence 0, 1, 2, 3, and now I know how the continue is. Now I know how to go on. It cannot be explained by saying, this person internally somehow has made a cognitive model, or in the simplest case, what we call a rule that allows a person to say, I get it, I know what's going on. Basically, the point here is just a person saying, I get it, doesn't mean the person now has a rule in his head. Okay. But this can be generalized to any kind of scheme. Okay. Just a person saying, oh, I get it now, cannot be used to show that this person has now suddenly some sort of cognitive understanding of what's going on. Okay. So here, this paragraph in Prop 73 is very important. Okay. We can also imagine the case where nothing at all occurred in B's mind, except that he suddenly said, now I know how to go on, perhaps with a feeling of relief. And in fact, he actually carries on. We can imagine that situation. Okay. And in this case, we would say, he did know how to go on. Okay. Do you see how profound this is? Because this means that all this work in cognitive science and AI for that matter, and trying to build models of cognition are not necessary. They're not necessary. Okay. They can happen, they may not happen. Okay. Because the key thing here for Wittgenstein is right here, that he did in fact go working on the series. It all goes down to pragmatically, in actuality, does this person or does this person not continue the series the way that A wants it? Okay. Anything else is a theoretical extrapolation to try to explain something. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see what he's saying? And that's a philosopher's game or a cognitive scientist's game. It might make them happy, but it doesn't operate, in the lived experience of what's going on here between A and B. Okay, to the point. And later on, he keeps on going to even to kind of explode these other phrases here to understand, Okay, now I'm looking for 199. This is the set of examples I was talking about where maybe the person follows some sort of rule up to a certain point and decides to follow something else. Here it is. Okay. Here it is. This one. Here we go. Here. Okay, let's look at this. Now it goes into this question about what does it mean to obey a rule at all, any kind of rule. All right. So, is it possible? Is a rule if only one person in the universe follows it? What do you think? Doesn't matter. In other words, if is what we call a rule. Here, let me just. You guys can look this up. This is 199. Okay. If we want to have a concept of a rule, should that concept depend on how many people follow it? What do you think? notion of rule doesn't seem to me to depend on some accidents, like is it followed by 5 or 6 people? Think about law, right? A law is a law is a law because it's on the books. It's not a function of how many people follow the law, right? It might be if nobody follows the law, it's kind of stupid law. People should maybe go to the legislature and agitate. And I mean, there are such laws, right? There are laws in the books that are extinct, 19th century laws that nobody would really want to enforce. Okay. But legally speaking, there are laws. Therefore, legally speaking, you would be in violation. You could be subject to prosecution if you violate the law, blah, blah, blah. Sure. But the fact that it's a law is not dependent on how many people follow it. So that's Wittgenstein's ultimate. You push that logic. Is a rule if it would be possible for only one person to follow it? And even more, is a rule if only done by one person, followed by one person only once? Only once.
Isn't this in contrast with how he's defining meaning, where he said the meaning of a word is how it is used?
Yes, isn't it, right? Because then it's based on a pragmatic consideration. Whereas rules are defined not pragmatically. I mean, the concepts of rules, they're not pragmatic concepts. Pragma means what do people actually do? Yeah. And the point of this little paragraph here is not about whether we should follow rules, whether we do follow rules, et cetera, et cetera. It's more about what he calls the grammar of the expression to obey a rule. Okay. So he's criticizing, what his critique is basically this conceit that just because we're able to say X is a person is obeying a rule as if it explains anything. That's what he's critiquing. Okay, this is a methodological critique. Okay, the reason I read Wittgenstein in the PhD seminar, like a proseminar like this, is to kind of be very careful at the beginning. This kind of like pointing out certain kinds of methodological problems with a lot of theories, okay, about behavior, about people, models of cognition, what have you, about language. Okay, this is a very key work, philosophical investigations. Next, maybe you can lighten this up with an example. Chess, this is 200, okay? And this I usually turn into an exercise, kind of fun exercise. And he said, what if, we have this game of chess, right? And it has these rules. But suppose we come across, what is it here? I'll share it here. Yeah. This is a scanning error, sorry. Suppose we take a game of chess, not chess in general, but a particular game of chess, and we translated that into certain rules, into sequence of actions, okay, which are basically people in the field stomping their feet and yelling or something like that, okay? But all the actions were actually acting out the game of chess, all right? And then we could say, but they don't look like a chess game, okay? But they're actually acting out according to the rules of specific chess moves of a specific chess game. And would we say that they were still playing the game, etc.? Okay. And probably the most important thing is right here. That what I was saying earlier, right? No course of action could be determined by a rule because every course of action can be made out to follow the rule. And if everything can be made out according to the rule, it can also be made out to conflict with it. Okay. This is worth chewing on.
Can you explain that a little bit further? Because my brain doesn't even know where to start chewing.
Yeah, yeah. This takes. I'm still working on this. Okay, so basically, it's really amazing. It's really amazing. After the earlier examples that we've been, I'm going too fast. This is why you really need to read it several times and go through it, give it more time. But the examples he was showing earlier, like the example, for example, of copying out numbers, and then I'd say, I don't know, like I say one, you say three, I say two, you say five, and then I just hit the integers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But then the other person says 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, whatever, 23. In other words, the primes. Okay, the primes. Until I get to something, and the person suddenly says 4. Say, hey, wait a minute. And then the person says to me, well, I just followed this rule that at the 100th prime, I say 4, whatever. Okay, so these kinds of examples, okay, Wittgenstein's bringing into play to show us that any sequence of actions can be made to accord with a rule.
It seems like I was taking this to indicate that this game, this chess game that is being played in a way that maybe some people would not recognize as chess, they would say that that is not chess, but that we can map the rules that we made about chess onto these other actions. And therefore the rule about what is and is not chess is, I don't know.
Yeah, let's take this. Okay, let's take this. Okay, so people are stomping their feet and jumping around, things like that. So if we just come to it fresh, not having read Wittgenstein, all this paragraph 200, right? We could come to it and say, oh, we're interpreting this as some sort of ritual ceremony, and to honor their ancestors, and can do even maybe a musical analysis. Who knows, right? We can come up with different kinds of accounts of it, and then later on say, oh, by the way, they were just following actually on the game of chess, right? I mean, you can imagine this kind of thing happening, or the other way around, right? You may or may not be. They may or may not be enacting a game of chess. Okay. Either way, you have the same encounter with the situation. This is deep consequences, not just for cognitive science and AI, but also for science in general. Okay. This is not the same thing as saying some accounts are wrong. It's not that. Not the statement of this wrong, that's right. Okay. It said it's not a necessity. Okay. Here's the thing. If I've taught an undergraduate course where we read some of this. We don't try to get as deep into it, but it's a fun exercise, which is I ask people to take a particular game of chess. Well, what I usually ask them to do is take the fool's mate, the 4-move chess, the shortest chess game, 4-move chess. Or if they want, they can take the game that's actually in Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass. There's an actual chess game in it. It's in the back of the book. Take whichever they choose, and then translate that into anything they want. This is for art students, so usually it's pretty fun. So I remember one year, for example, 3 students turned it into a fencing game, a fencing match. So every piece had a certain mapping, and maybe to a certain, I don't know what, and then the moves were actually fencing moves, for example. Another one was turned into cooking, to something ultimately was kind of like involving food and drink. It's amazing, actually. It's actually pretty amazing. how far I can push this translation game. So it might be interesting to think about that. Say how you would make this kind of translation of a game of chess. It's not simple, actually. You think about it, because you'd have to make a mapping. Fully, you need to well, the game is you have to make the exercise, you have to make a deterministic mapping. Okay, not random. So that means that every piece has to map to some well-defined thing or activity. Right, and the kinds of moves that the piece might make, right, map to, again, something or activity, or could be some relation to make it more abstract. And to make that mapping functional mapping, it would have to be something which accounts for the rules that each piece could follow, right? Like a knight, let's say. Well, let's take it easier, like a rook, okay? You can move, it's not about just moving this rook to this particular square. You have to actually map the fact that rook can go as far as it can in any unobstructed direction, horizontal or vertical. That has to be mapped over. Okay, it's not trivial. This is not an easy exercise. It's a fun exercise. Okay. And people have always been able to come up with something. It's really interesting. Okay. Working backwards. Okay, we'll take another break. Working backwards, here's an example from neuroscience. Okay. In neuroscience, there's a lot of brain imaging, right? So people put like 128 electrodes on your scalp. They take out these multi-channel recordings, right, of the electrical potentials. They have these graphs. And from there, you're supposed to infer brain states. And of course, from there, you can also try to infer mental states as well. Okay, what thoughts are happening. And we all seen, right, some of these kind of like Elon Musk has that company, Neuralink, right? You can use brain control of various things. I went to a conference in neuroscience. Wow, where was it? Anyway, and one of the founders of the field of mobile brain imaging, kind of physicist, neuroscientist, gave this really interesting talk where he showed a simulation where there were two little dipole electrons, let's say, okay, dipoles, charges that are moving up and down, one like this and one like this next to it. So you know when electric charges move in accelerated motion, they will put out an electric field, okay? So there were two of them. So the fields were interfering with each other or adding, and then they propagate out. And then he had a model, 3D model of a scalp, and then he put in the simulation, in the simulated world, virtual pickups at the scalp, at the virtual scalp, to pick up the resultant electric field due to these two little charges moving up and down. No brain, okay? No, not even a model of a brain, just two electric charges. And then he showed us the visualization of the field strength as measured by these electrodes. And it looked very much like the kind of data we would get from a real brain. His point was, and yet there's nothing inside except two little charges moving up and down. So his point was that we can take the data that we perceive, we can measure from this kind of sphere of directions, 120 points, and it can give all these interesting time courses of data. Okay, but just from these, we cannot really distinguish what's going on inside from easily from something which has some metabolism and some neural morphology, and just two little abstract charges moving up and down. Okay, and he was a founder of this field. So, okay. All right. Let's, I know I didn't actually give you time to read some of this stuff so much, but we do have a little bit of time. So here's what I said. We can take a break, a little break. But I'm trying to think about there's so much here that we can look at. I'm imagining what would be a good way to do this. If we were in the room, one thing I would do really is just say, hey, let's just read stuff, read passages, on your own in the room, and then come back together, regroup and talk. Because I'm thinking that probably, especially if this is the first time, it's probably better to give yourself some time to read stuff from this, right? So we have, let's say we have half an hour or 20 minutes. Can we do this? Can we maybe jump to a different section where Wittgenstein is talking about sensation and pain, the sense of pain, okay? And there's a bunch of passages that have to do with that. I'll put that into chat. But maybe what we should have is a question to come back to. And the question can be something like this. Basically, can we feel another person's pain? That's basic. I feel my pain. I can see if you're in pain. You can say that you're in pain, but I'm not feeling your pain, right? I can be empathetic. Basically. All right, and let's see what Wittgenstein says in this mix, okay, between feeling the pain or understanding that, and versus understanding that you're in pain, versus you say that you're in pain. What is that? What is that to say? Okay, and you can contrast that with saying that I'm thinking or you're thinking. Okay, he has this example here. Let's say the chair is thinking. I don't remember which word it is. The chair is thinking, and then you ask where, right? Versus she's thinking, and people don't ask where. I mean, people would say, to say where after the question, after the statement, the chair is thinking, it's okay. It doesn't raise too many eyebrows. First of all, it's the first statement that's weird. But to say a person is thinking, you don't usually qualify that. Where is this thinking? And that's very interesting because thinking doesn't seem to have a locus. You can say, oh, in the brain, or that. But that's, just say the person's thinking. What is the person thinking about? Okay. So, all right. Is it okay? So we can come back, but when we come back, what I'll do in about 5-6 minutes, just have a bio break. I'll keep the video going, but you should come back and then let's take a bit like 10 minutes, 8 minutes or so to read for passages that talk about pain. Okay. All right. So take a break. I'll meanwhile type in those passages for you. Would it be helpful if we just looked at a couple paragraphs, together, and then, maybe that could be something. Try to work through just a few paragraphs together, and see, what's he doing here. Then we can leave you free to go back and look at it yourself. So we'll do a kind of a high-level view, and then maybe kind of like really a close view. Okay. Using those passages about pain as our working material, because we're doing several layers of work at the same time. One is just thinking carefully about what I was asking, can we feel somebody else's pain? What's going on here? And what's the relationship between hearing expressions of pain or making expression of pain versus the pain? That's one level. That's kind of the kind of the ground level. Okay. because we experience pain, we talk about pain, so at least there's something to work with, okay, in terms of our respective and collective experience. And at another level, he's trying to think through relationship between how we're languaging, okay, it's, using words with each other and circulating words with each other, the relationship between languaging activity and what philosophers and cognitive scientists claim is going on, like mentally, so to speak, right? And basically he's one could say that he's part of this kind of line of thinking of what we might call pragmatic thinking. Pragmatic, meaning let's hold off on the theory and let's look at what people do, and then we come up with some explanations. But so this is what we would mean by pragmatic, okay. What people do is not just physics, okay. Yes, of course, includes hard stuff and constraints like that, but also socially, right? So these are two different layers, very different layers of critique that he's doing, okay. And also the way that he's doing it here, paragraph by paragraph, these little chunks, okay. I always like Wittgenstein because they're bite size, but each bite is very hard to chew. Okay, but they are bite size. And after reading this over so many years, each time I get something more out of it, you begin to see that there is a structure. There are these arcs, a bunch of paragraphs together, and then kind of leads us through some thought exercises, And then he says, "Oh, it's not this, not that. It's not this, it's not that. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. Hey, did you think about this? Oh, wow." Kind of blows up things, and then he makes at a few points. He's going to say, "Oh, here's," he actually makes a few definite statements. And maybe the one big takeaway is, and I was pragmatic, is how people use words. Okay, so that's what I want to do with the pain stuff. Okay, so let's share screen. Anybody want to draw attention to something in this area, or no?
I think it would be helpful to discuss 293 as a group. The very last section of it, I can't comprehend.
Yeah, can you read out this passage? Or
the specific section or the whole thing?
the whole thing, yeah. It's a good passage. It's a good passage.
Okay. If I say of myself that it is only from my own case that I know what the word pain means, must I not say the same of other people too? And how can I generalize the one case so irresponsibly? Now someone tells me that he knows what pain is only from his own case. Suppose everyone had a box with something in it. We call it a beetle. No one can look into anyone else's box, and everyone says he knows what a beetle is only by looking at his beetle. Here, it would be quite possible for everyone to have something different in his box. One might even imagine such a thing constantly changing. But suppose the word beetle had a use in these people's language. If so, it would not be used as the name of a thing. The thing in the box has no place in the language game, not at all. Not even as a something, for the box might even be empty. No one can divide through by the thing in the box. It cancels out, whatever it is. That is to say, if we construe the grammar of the expression of sensation on the model of object and designation, the object drops out of consideration as irrelevant. The object and designation portion is what specifically confuses me, but it kind of makes more sense now. But yeah, I guess I just want to hear other people's thoughts on it.
Yeah, okay, other people. What are your thoughts on this?
Other people.
Not just me.
I just, I don't know. Specifically in the case of pain, it's not a beetle in a box. It's not that. We all have some physical form that is very much like, very much like everyone else's physical form. And so there's like an analogy from me to someone else and from them back to me that's happening when I think of the idea I can feel someone else's pain. I may not have it precisely. And one of the things he said on 246 is that we might say, other people very often know when I am in pain, yes, but all the same, not with the certainty with which I know it myself. So that seems more true than the idea that other people's pain is potentially so, I have no idea. It's a box and I can't possibly know other than we named it beetle or pain or whatever name we put on it. I don't think that that's true in this case.
I agree.
Going back to this beetle in the box, where is this beetle? It's 290.
293.
Here. I think it's that last thing that Morgan was pointing, that last paragraph, that's the key, right? The punchline. I mean, what he's criticizing is not so much about, well, okay, back up, sorry. Analogy is pretty tricky, right? To say by analogy too. And that's a can of worms, right? Already that's kind of leaping over, I guess, this kind of infinite abyss between, one person and another person. And that some of these accounts are trying to bridge over. And it may be the case that here, Wittgenstein isn't going to wade into that mess. He's actually something else. He's looking at, the attempt to use labels like the word pain, and claim that just because you and I both use the word pain, we kind of know each other's pain, just by the fact that we're using the word pain. And that's why I think he was thinking about the beetle in the box, which I think is amusing. I mean, in the sense, the word pain, P-A-N, is a box, right? And the referent is the private pain, our respective private pain. That's the
okay.
My beetle, her beetle,
That cleared it up.
right? So
I was misdefining which was which, the beetle and the box. Yeah. Okay, got it.
Right. So then it makes more sense, because what we can see is the outside of the boxes.
Yeah.
And well, here's the thing. See, he's not even debating whether it's true or not true, authentic, not authentic. It's more the fact that the grammatical structure is a signifier and a signified, where the signified is something supposedly private and personal and inaccessible to any other being, my pain, and that this compound of the signifier, P-A-I-N, and the signified, this mysterious individual, private, personal pain, is what is actually bound together in this kind of magical association where, hey, everybody has their different bindings from the same signifier to these different signifieds, to use semiotic language. But that's the grammar, what he means. Grammar is that box internal, that's the structure. And that's, what is it here? See, if that's the case, and we can observe is the circulation of the boxes, means the circulation of the word pain in discourse, the content doesn't matter. So we may as well quote divide out. He says divide out. Yeah, divide. It's like a common denominator. So it's that means that the referent is immaterial with respect to the deployment of the language, and its effective deployment. Effective meaning it can elicit sympathy. Doctors can come. Blah blah blah. People can be cruel or kind. It's effective. Makes sense.
Mhm.
One of my favorite passages. The beat on the box.
I'm gonna start using that.
Oh, that's just a beetle.
Yeah.
Show me your beetle. Okay, so what else in this passage is on pain?
One
There's a-
thing
Go ahead, please.
One thing that I think is interesting is actually, and it may have been elsewhere that I missed, but in what I was just looking through from the passages you pulled out, it's specifically referring to physical pain. But there are other points throughout where like he talks about grief. And I don't know that he uses the word pain in relation to grief, but I would. Like to me, that is an emotional and honestly sometimes can be translated to a physical pain too, but emotional pain, I think, coming back to, can you feel somebody else's pain? If it's presented in a way you really connect with, I think you can feel somebody else's emotional pain. That's what movies and stories are doing, often in fictional settings, and we still feel their pain. So, yeah, I don't know.
I'm trying to find it. He said I just found it. So he said something about being, so this is in 253. And it says here, I've seen a person in a discussion on this subject strike himself on the breast and say, but surely another person can't have this pain. The answer to this is that one does not define a criterion of identity by emphatic stressing of the word this. Rather, what the emphasis does is to suggest the case in which we are conversant with such a criteria of identity, but have to be reminded of it. And so being reminded of it, and I'm wondering if that's when you're talking about like a movie or something like that, so we aren't feeling their pain, but we are being reminded of something like their pain. I don't know.
I'm looking at 253. Hang on.
And then I'm not criterion of identity, I guess, is I want to make sure I understand what that means.
Here. No, let me share it since it's let me just share this message. Here it is, 253. Yeah. Before going into this, going to what Rachel was pointing out, I just did a quick search for grief, and they'll show up later in the book. And I don't know whether he's using grief as a synonym for pain or not. I mean, just a few passages I looked up made it look like he was trying to use the examples of grief the way that earlier he uses examples of pain, but I can't say. I'd have to look at it. I'd have to look at it. Okay, I'm tending to think that maybe yes. But another thing that comes up, and it's not treated here in Wittgenstein, is that maybe certain kinds of qualities, we try to think about analogy or sympathy or empathy, so let's say. We try to bridge the scope between one person and another person by using such notions. Maybe that's that, and I think all these problems come up when we try to think about pain, let's say, as properties of one individual. And that's what he was talking about too in the beetle in the box example, the object predicate construction. we can carry that on some more, because you see, something else I'd like to think about starting next week, I guess, is thinking about relationality. Relationality. So a lot of these kinds of concepts, maybe these kinds of problems may get softened or even dissolved if we, instead of thinking about something like pain, or pain is, well, let's say pain, grief, let's say, as a property of one individual, atomic individual, perhaps we can think about these relationally, some of these things. Okay, maybe a quality that pertains to a relation among several or a field of subjects. Okay, and then from the get-go, there's some sharedness to those aspects of experience. Okay, I'm just studying foregrounding. What is it called? Foregrounding? Not foregrounding. Putting a forward reference to William James. Okay, a little bit. Now we go to 253. Well, somebody want to kind of walk us through this? How to interpret 253? Or Tanya, you bringing this in. You can repeat what you're thinking about 253 here.
Well, I guess I was just thinking about what, I mean, earlier we were talking about memory, and that's what he's, to be reminded of something is to call up a memory. And I guess, and I think what he's saying here is that someone is placing emphasis, this statement that they said, but surely another person can't have this pain. And this emphasis is, I'm not even, I don't think I completely follow. There's something here and I don't quite know how to bring it out more.
This last part, right? This last part, one does not define a criterion of identity by just saying this. Rather, what emphasis does is to suggest the case in which we're conversant with such a criterion of identity. Yeah.
I mean, the way that I interpret this is just
what do you think is meant by identity here, first of all? Identity with what? Me with the other, or myself? I'm identifying myself.
Well, the way it says be reminded of it, I guess I kind of took it to mean myself as I identify with that pain.
Okay.
In the first little paragraph of this section, he says, what counts as a criterion of identity here? Consider what makes it possible in the case of physical objects to speak of two exactly the same. For example, to say this chair is not the one you saw here yesterday, but is exactly the same as it.
Then he says in the next paragraph, to follow what you're saying, both of us to have the same pain. It's like saying me now, me yesterday. It's two different me's because two different times. Also, me and you, there's also displacement. So maybe identity is this kind of sense of identity. Because in other words, self-identification is no more mysterious, no less mysterious than identification between me and you, actually, because that was yesterday, right? So okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Okay, this kind of identification. So then it would be across. But again, you see, to move up a level, Wittgenstein is pointing out kind of the grammatical mysteries that are actually being thrown out here, to basically caution his peers from going too fast. Okay, the relational approach in philosophy that came later and before actually steps around this problem altogether. So that's why we're going to move into thinking about kind of more what one might call some people call it distributed, notions of subjectivity, relational ways of thinking about different kinds of qualities such as intelligence, and all that. So this is pointing out, Wittgenstein is pointing out severe problems with the kind of the dualist, mind body or mind matter, and also object-based metaphysics. Okay, that was prevalent. It still is actually. Okay, so this is a starting point. Okay, this is kind of a critique of, in fact, what one might call a positivist approach to this kind of Cartesian metaphysics. Cartesian meaning, this kind of mind-body separation and duality, and this idea that there are atomic subjects. The cogito. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. So we're starting from this point. Okay, all right. So I want to commend you, those who are energetic and brave enough to dive into this, a few paragraphs here and there. And I do hope that you come back and look at the passages. I've been reading this work for, gosh, I guess decades, and I've had the pleasure of doing it. And every time I learn something new, and actually every time I think he's funnier and funnier. I actually do think he has a deadpan humor, and you might pick it up later. All right. So next week, I'd like to we'll see you in person, and we'll look at some passages from William James, I believe, right, on experience. Basic point there is going to be like this. William James is one of these American pragmatists. Ooh, 1 minute overtime. Okay. I think the United States produced some amazing philosophers and thinkers in this area. It was called pragmatism. Okay. And William James is one of them. So there's also this guy named Charles Sanders Peirce, James John Dewey. So kind of this group of people. He's a good writer. He's very urbane, very, good fluid flow, but his concepts are actually tough. His arguments are very careful. And one of the basic things is this idea of starting with experience rather than starting with subjects and objects and a priori subjects and objects, and also starting with concrete experience rather than starting some abstractions like geometry or logic. Okay, so hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good
Thank
work,
you.
you guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.